Tonight, the war in Afghanistan enters a ninth year, and with no end in sight, President Obama convenes his top advisors to debate a new strategy. I'm Katie Couric. The president and his war council are facing enormous challenges and decisions, including a request for more U.S. troops, corruption in the Afghan government, Pakistan proving to be the shakiest of allies, and Iran arming America's enemies, taking more and more U.S. lives. Tonight, special extensive coverage of Afghanistan, the road ahead.
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
Good evening, everyone. 8 years ago tonight, less than a month after 9/11, President Bush ordered the first U.S. troops into Afghanistan to hunt down the terrorists responsible and oust their Taliban hosts from power. Now, after 869 American deaths and a price tag of nearly $200 billion, a new president is deciding where we go from here. President Obama called in his national security team today to help him make some of the toughest decisions he'll face as commander-in-chief. Chip Reid is at the White House tonight. And Chip, what can you tell us about the meeting?
Well, Katie, the full War Council meeting has now ended. This is the third of 5 of these very long meetings, and sources tell us they still haven't talked about the issue of whether to send more troops. It's all been about overall strategy. But the big question buzzing around Washington right now outside of that room is whether the president is going to accept the recommendation of his top general in Afghanistan. Sources tell CBS News that General Stanley McChrystal's strong recommendation to the president is for 40,000 additional troops for Afghanistan on top of the 65,000 already there. He also gave the president several options as low as 10,000. Sources say McChrystal initially wanted 50,000, but was convinced to knock it down. He believes anything short of the 40,000, though, increases the risk of failure. Even so, sources say the president may be leaning toward a mid-range number to get support from skeptical Democrats. Among those at today's War Council meeting, sources say Hillary Clinton is leaning toward supporting McChrystal. Vice President Joe Biden opposes his request. Other important voices at the table include Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Admiral Michael Mullen, National Security Advisor Jim Jones, and CIA Director Leon Panetta. The debate over whether to send more troops could heat up in the next meeting scheduled for Friday. Katie?
Chip Reid. Chip, thanks very much. One of the biggest problems President Obama faces in Afghanistan is President Hamid Karzai. He presides over a government that's been called everything from inept to corrupt. When Hamid Karzai became the interim president of Afghanistan in 2001, there were great expectations that he would be an honest leader.
A majority of Afghans, even including some people in the Taliban, thought that Hamid Karzai was the right person to lead the country towards peace and stability.
But 8 years later, both his people and his allies worry he's anything but honest.
Now, most people seem to be deeply disappointed that he's failed as a leadership and he presides over a corrupt administration.
When he ran for re-election the second time, Karzai chose Marshal Fahim as a running mate. He's believed to be a drug dealer and a warlord.
The coalition President Karzai put together to support him in this election drew on, frankly, some of the worst elements of recent Afghan history.
And when the election was held in August, there were so many reports of fraud committed by Karzai's supporters that a massive recount and UN investigation are still underway. His opponent, Dr. Abdullah Abdullah, refuses to concede.
I think had he had the best interest of Afghanistan in his heart, he would have respected the law of the country, the constitution, the electoral law, as well as the electoral process.
There are also accusations that Karzai's own brother is linked to the drug trade. He's the leader of Kandahar in southern Afghanistan, the region which produces 90% of the world's heroin and opium.
There's no security, and it seems that the mafia have more say in the President's palace than ordinary people.
Bill, how are you?
The commander of the U.S. forces in Afghanistan admits all of these allegations of corruption make his job a lot harder.
Does this corruption drive people into the arms of the Taliban?
It absolutely does. A lack of trust in their own government undercuts the willingness to give their support to the government.
And if the Afghan people don't support their government, they might not join an army to defend it, making it almost impossible to predict how long U.S. forces will have to stay.
I'm not going to, put a happy face on and say, oh yeah, we'll get that done in a year or two. This is hard work, and it requires having a government that has the trust, the confidence, and the loyalty of the security forces.
The United States desperately wants to see more stability in Afghanistan, where U.S. forces face a new and growing threat from across the border in Iran. Chief Foreign Affairs correspondent Lara Logan begins the story in Herat.
This is the ancient city of Herat, Afghanistan's best-kept secret. For years, it has enjoyed 24-hour electricity and a booming economy. Not thanks to U.S. efforts, it's all because of Iran. The city lies right on Afghanistan's border with Iran, fueling strong economic ties. But lately, Iran's been making a different kind of investment, one increasingly worrying to the U.S. It's backing the Taliban. As this recent discovery in a hardcore Taliban village shows.
It's Iranian.
A soldier from 7th Group Special Forces finds rocket-propelled grenades that he knows from experience are made in Iran. Among other evidence, there are telltale markings.
Like right here, this is 82mm HE lot 02/87. The Iranians pretty much copy all of our ordnance, but like these lot numbers, you'll never see a U.S. lot number like that.
The find confirms what U.S. commanders and troops in Afghanistan are seeing more often.
We are seeing a rise in the level of cooperation between Iran and the Taliban. Why is that? Well, I think Iran feels threatened, and I think it feels that its interests are best served by being able to hurt the United States in Afghanistan.
The west of Afghanistan bordering Iran is fast becoming a graveyard for U.S. forces. U.S. deaths there have spiked from 4 a year since the war began to 13 in the last 5 months alone. U.S. military officials have told CBS News that Iran is sending both money and weapons onto the Afghan battlefield. But U.S. commanders are not allowed to talk about it. Even as Iranian weapons are killing U.S. soldiers, it's unclear to their commanders what the U.S. strategy is for dealing with Iran's increasingly deadly involvement. CBS News has learned that the deadliest form of roadside bomb on the Iraqi battlefield, explosively formed penetrators or EFPs, is now being found in Afghanistan. Lethal, armor-piercing bombs that can slice through U.S. Humvees. They're also an Iranian specialty. More worrying still, U.S. intelligence believes Iran is supplying surface-to-air missiles to the Taliban, the very same weapon the U.S. supplied to the Afghan resistance to bring down the Russians.
We are losing this war every day.
Bruce Riedel led the Obama administration's strategy review of Afghanistan and Pakistan earlier this year, but he's also very worried about Iran.
It's clear that U.S.-Iranian relations now are going to go into an increasingly difficult period. And if I was sitting in Tehran, I'd be looking for the place where you could hurt the Americans the most. And that's Obama's war right next door in Afghanistan.
Iran knows the U.S. is already stretched to the limit in southern and eastern Afghanistan, so opening a new front in the west can only make it even more difficult for the U.S. to succeed.
In a sense, Iran has fired a few warning shots across our bow.
The Iranian threat means that for the U.S., there is even more at stake in Afghanistan than ever before. Lara Logan, CBS News, Kabul.
Coming up next, right here on the CBS Evening News, why the future of Afghanistan could depend on what happens in Pakistan. Today's meeting of President Obama's War Council focused largely on Pakistan, and for good reason. Its border is home to thousands of Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters who often cross into Afghanistan to attack U.S. forces. From Pakistan's Swat Valley, here's Terry McCarthy.
Swat Valley went from tourist heaven to terrorist hell in less than 2 years. Last February, the Taliban were in control. Women were publicly flogged for daring to refuse forced marriages or walking unaccompanied in the streets. The Taliban banned music, blew up schools, and slit policemen's throats at will.
So they were beheading people?
Yeah,
right
they
here.
were beheading in this video.
For years, the Pakistani government has allowed extremists to live along its borders. But it was only when the Taliban took over this once popular tourist valley that people suddenly started to realize the stability of their entire country was being threatened.
In May, 30,000 troops retook the valley, but the Taliban's advance into Pakistani heartland was shocking, particularly because this is a country that has some 80 nuclear weapons and has conducted successful underground tests.
There are many Americans who are concerned that if Pakistan were to be destabilized, that Pakistan's nuclear weapons could become available.
If we can create assets, we know how to defend it. I can assure you with full assurance, there's no danger at all.
But danger is everywhere in Pakistan. Osama bin Laden is thought to be hiding in the mountains here, as well as Taliban leader Mullah Omar, both fiercely protected by local tribes. A big recipient of U.S. military aid already, $2 billion for 2009, the government says it needs even more. Specifically the drones America uses to strike at militants in the tribal areas. The Pakistani military complains the drones are violating their sovereignty and want to fly their own missions.
Give us the drone technology.
Do you think the U.S. would give you drones? They would.
Why not? If
where
they can
you
give
would
us,
use it against India?
Terry, if they can give us F-16, the drone is a much simpler bird. And, well, we can give undertaking we are not going to use against India.
But trust levels between the U.S. and Pakistan are shaky at best. If the U.S. withdrew abruptly from Afghanistan and that country plunged into civil war, the extremist threat inside Pakistan would likely escalate.
An Afghanistan collapse will threaten the stability of this entire region, not just Pakistan. It will have massive impact.
The general who commanded the assault on Swat Valley says that is his nightmare scenario.
It's a difficult situation. It is a kind of a nightmare. So we wouldn't want that to happen. We need Afghanistan to be stable.
Americans continue to fight for stability in Afghanistan. But increasingly, Washington is asking whether stability in Pakistan is even more crucial. Terry McCarthy, CBS News, Swat Valley, Pakistan.
While President Obama was focusing on the war in Afghanistan today, he sent his attorney general to what's become a war zone in this country, with children the victims, in the president's hometown of Chicago. Eric Holder said youth violence is a national problem and the administration is determined to stop it.
We simply cannot stand for an epidemic of violence that robs our youth of their childhood and perpetuates a cycle in which too many of today's victims become tomorrow's criminals.
A Justice Department survey out today says 3 out of 5 children nationwide were exposed to real-life violence in the past year, either directly or indirectly. Randall Pinkston now on a deadly attack the Attorney General refers to as a wake-up call.
This shocking video of a group of kids beating 16-year-old Darian Albert to death in an after-school melee was the 5th student death in just 6 weeks of this new school year.
What happened to Darian was barbaric. It was barbaric by young people.
It's opened the nation's eyes to Chicago's youth murders. In each of the last 3 years, a classroom of children has been killed, from 27 in 2006 to a record 37 in 2008. And there were 500 children injured by gunshot last year alone.
And every time we see another child murdered, another senseless act of violence in the city, you know, it hurts.
Did you know any of the kids who were involved in this? 17-year-old Jermaine Fareed, who walks to school past makeshift memorials, worries about surviving the day.
How often do fights break out in your school or near your school?
Like 4 times out the week.
The 2 U.S. cabinet secretaries joined city officials to highlight national concern over youth violence.
To those who seek to lay blame on anyone else, I challenge you to ask first, what have you done?
The Justice Department is pledging $16 million to boost school security around the country, $500,000 for Chicago. The city is also using $30 million in federal stimulus funds to identify and help 1,200 children who are most at risk of getting shot. The students from 38 schools will be selected based on poor academic performance, family environment, and location, focusing on areas where other deaths have occurred.
What will the Safe Passage program do?
Parents like Leslie Carthen are trying to fill the void, escorting students to and from school. Until now, adult promises haven't given kids much hope.
Do you think police or school officials can do anything to make your school safer?
Not really.
A sobering thought that the city knows it has to change. Randall Pinkston, CBS News, Chicago.
And coming up next, the stories that stay with reporters long after they've left the war zone. For 8 years now, journalists have been risking their lives to bring clarity out of the fog of war in Afghanistan. Tonight, we give the final words of this broadcast to the men and women of CBS News who have experienced the war up close.
I've been to a lot of bad neighborhoods for CBS News. There's no neighborhood worse than Afghanistan. I'm Byron Pitts, Chief National Correspondent for CBS News, contributing correspondent to 60 Minutes. I've been to Afghanistan twice, spent about a month and a half there. I was there in November of 2001, just a few months after 9/11. And I was traveling with a team of folk from CBS News, and we catch up with a warlord. And he tells us with a big smile on his face that he had just killed about 12 to 20 Taliban.
Yes, yes.
And I said, well, how can you be so certain of the exact number of people you just killed? He says, oh, I know, because they were laying in a ditch, and I ran them over. And I counted them as I ran them over.
In 2003, on the Pakistani border, our convoy hit a double anti-tank mine, and the soldier next to me lost his leg. I'm Lara Logan. I'm the Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent for CBS Evening News and a correspondent for 60 Minutes. I remember everything going completely white and hearing my cameraman producer Jeff Newton, who had landed right on top of me and actually was this far from my face, screaming my name, but I couldn't hear it. To me, it was in the distance. And he was looking at me, and my eyes were wide open and blood was pouring out of my mouth. And the sergeant turned to him and said, is she all right? And he said, no, I think she's dead. And I remember thinking, oh my God, they're going to leave me here to die because they think I'm already dead.
Hurry up! Mitchell, here first, Sergeant.
I'm Scott Pelley, a correspondent on 60 Minutes, and I've been to Afghanistan about 5 times.
I'm Henry Schuster. I'm a producer for 60 Minutes. I've been to Afghanistan a number of times. Most recently, it was last month for 3 weeks.
We were in a field expedient battlefield memorial for 7 Marines in one company who'd been killed since the assault began in July. Arrayed in front of the Marines, there are 7 battlefield crosses, which is a pair of boots, a rifle, and a helmet on top with the dog tags of the deceased Marines.
The first sergeant does a roll call.
Garner! Here first, Sergeant!
He calls a couple of names. They answer present. Then he starts calling the names of the dead Marines. He calls the name first at a normal tone of voice. No answer. He calls it again, louder this time. No answer. The third time he calls it, there's a great deal of urgency, and he's practically shouting, as you would expect a Marine sergeant to do. And the silence is overwhelming.
We were on a convoy for 2 days. It was terrifying. My name's Tom Anderson. I'm a producer on 60 Minutes. The bombs, which are the primary weapon in this war, go off on the side of the roads. So you're always looking at the side of the road rather than the front of the road. And it would happen once, and then it would happen a second time, happen a third time, boom, boom, 4 times, 5 times. I'm not sure I'd ever want to do it again.
The enemy seems to be moving around a lot, and each time I go to Afghanistan, it seems like it's more dangerous. There's always this sense that something could be around the corner. There was a governor who had survived 3 assassination attempts. And I asked him, why do you do what you do? Why do you continue to do it? He has a family. And he said, if I didn't do it, who would? I would definitely go back to Afghanistan. I'm very eager to go back to Afghanistan. I'm very anxious to see how the military is planning on winning this war. I do think it's a story that's going to continue to unfold for years.
This country is medieval.
I'm David Martin. I'm the CBS News national security correspondent.
I'm Mary Walsh. I am the Pentagon producer for CBS News. We went into a small village called Yagukala with American troops. They had brought with them backpacks for the children.
It immediately turned into a fight because there were more kids than there were book bags to go around, and the village elders were literally beating the kids away.
Sure enough, all the backpacks were going to the boys until the very last backpack was handed out, and one little girl grabbed it and went running as hard as she could. It was just one of those very, very sad, eye-opening experiences of seeing how even good intentions, sometimes don't go far enough.
And you can find all the stories in this series on our website at cbsnews.com. Click on Afghanistan, The Road Ahead. And that is the CBS Evening News for tonight. I'm Katie Couric. Thank you for watching. Good night.